The rain came down hard on Millbrook that October night, in 2026, the kind of cold autumn rain that rattles against old window panes and makes a house feel smaller than it really is. Inside the brick home at the end of Willow Street, Margaret Halloran, 76 years old, stood at her kitchen sink washing a single plate, a single fork, a single coffee cup. The yellow overhead light flickered once, then steadied. She hummed quietly to herself. An old tune Vincent used to whistle when he came home from a long day on a job site, back when the world still made sense and she still had someone to cook for. She set the plate on the drying rack and reached for the dish towel. That was when it hit her. A pressure, sudden and terrible swelling behind her right eye, like a balloon being inflated inside her skull. Her hand opened on its own. The towel fell to the floor. She tried to speak, tried to call Vincent's name, even though Vincent had been dead 32 years, and the word would not come. Her knees buckled. The edge of the counter slid past her fingers. The kitchen tilted sideways, and then the cold tile floor was against her cheek. And the only sound left in the world was the slow, patient drip of the faucet she had forgotten to turn off all the way. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the yellow kitchen light kept burning. And Margaret Halloran, born in 1950, widow of a United States Navy man, mother of 3 grown children, who had not called her in weeks, lay perfectly still on the floor of the house she had lived in for 50 years. While 3 miles away, her oldest son, Gerald, refused another call from a number he did not recognize because he was about to close a deal. He did not know yet that the deal he should have been worrying about was his mother's life. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the house. Not the way a real estate agent understands a house with square footage and roof condition and resale value, but the way a woman understands the place where she raised her children and buried her husband. The house on Willow Street was a 2-story brick narrow front porch, a small garden along the side fence where Margaret still planted tomatoes every May, even though her hands shook now, and the trowel felt heavier each year. The paint on the shutters was fading. The gutters needed cleaning. The roof had maybe 2 good winters left in it. By every modern standard, it was nothing special. But every wall inside it had a story. The kitchen was where she had taught Gerald to crack an egg when he was 4 years old, where Vivian had announced she was getting married at 23, where Nathaniel had sat at the table at 16 and cried because a girl named Hannah had broken his heart. The living room was where Vincent had set up the Christmas tree every December from 1976 until 1993, the last Christmas he was strong enough to lift the box down from the attic. The small back bedroom was where he had died, in February of 1994, with Margaret holding his hand, and where she still went sometimes in the early evenings to sit on the edge of the bed and tell him about her day. The house was not just a house. The house was a marriage. The house was a life. And the house was something else too, something none of her children knew about. Something Vincent had built with his own hands in the spring of 1989 when the doctors first said the word cancer, and he had looked at his wife across a hospital cafeteria table and said very quietly, "I need to take care of some things, Maggie. I need to make sure you're protected." She had not understood then what he meant. She would understand soon enough. Vincent Halloran had been a United States Navy man. He had enlisted in 1954 at the age of 20. And he had served 8 years aboard the USS Forrestal, the great aircraft carrier that crossed the Atlantic more times than he could count, and spent long months patrolling the Mediterranean during the coldest, tensest years of the Cold War. He had stood watch on a steel deck at 3 in the morning under stars he could not name in waters he would never forget. He had received a Navy Commendation Medal in 1960 for an act of quiet courage during an engine room fire that he never once talked about at the dinner table. He had come home to Connecticut in 1962, met a young bookkeeper named Margaret at a church social 6 years later, and married her in the spring of 1969. He had started a small construction company that he ran out of a garage on Willow Street for the next 25 years. He was a careful man, a quiet man, a man who had seen enough of the world to know that the world could turn on you in a single afternoon. He did not trust banks. He did not trust politicians. He did not trust easy money or easy promises. What he trusted was land. Land you could walk on. Land you could put your boot down on and feel solid underneath. He used to tell Margaret sitting on the back porch with a beer in his hand and the sun going down over the maple trees. Land is the only thing nobody can lie to you about, Maggie. Banks can fail. Paper money can rot. But land just sits there and waits for you. She had laughed at him sometimes. She had called him stubborn. She had not understood then that he was building something for her quietly, year after year, lot by lot, while she was busy raising 3 children and balancing the checkbook of his small company. She would learn in time exactly what he had been doing. The children, the 3 Halloran children. Gerald was the oldest, 52 years old, living in Hartford in a 5-bedroom colonial he could not really afford, married to a woman named Diane, who collected handbags the way some women collect resentments. Gerald worked in commercial real estate. He wore suits that cost more than his father had ever spent on a suit in his entire life. He had not visited his mother in 8 months. He told himself this was because he was busy. He told himself this was because his mother was independent and didn't need him. He told himself a lot of things. What he did not tell himself, what he could not bear to think about, was that he had $19,000 in credit card debt and a second mortgage he was hiding from his wife. Vivian was 49, divorced 2 years ago from a dentist named Marcus, who had left her for his hygienist, a humiliation she had never quite recovered from. She worked as a marketing executive for a pharmaceutical company in Stamford. She posted photographs of herself on Facebook every Sunday with captions about gratitude and family and the importance of staying close to the people who raised you. She had not actually called her mother in 14 weeks. She told herself she would call this Sunday. Every Sunday she told herself she would call this Sunday. Nathaniel was the youngest, 44, and the only one who still came around now and then, though never for the right reasons. Nathaniel had drifted from job to job since he was 25. He had a gambling problem. He refused to call a gambling problem. He owed money to people whose names he would not say out loud. When he came to see his mother, which was maybe 3 or 4 times a year, he always left with a check for $200 or $300 tucked into his jacket pocket, and a promise that he would pay her back, which he never did, and which she had stopped expecting. These were the 3 people Margaret Halloran had given her life to. These were the 3 people who, within 48 hours of her stroke, would gather in a hospital hallway and decide that her house was an asset to be liquidated. But before we get to that hallway, you should know one more thing about Margaret. You should know that she was not the woman her children thought she was. She had been watching them for 10 years now, quietly, the way a woman who had grown up the daughter of a farmer learns to watch the weather. She had noticed the way Gerald's eyes drifted to the silver candlesticks on the dining room table every time he visited. She had noticed the way Vivian had once asked very casually whether the house was paid off. She had noticed Nathaniel checking the drawer in the kitchen where she kept her checkbook. She kept a small leather notebook in the top drawer of her nightstand. In it, in her careful bookkeeper's handwriting, she had written a single line dated 3 years ago. Vincent was right about them. The time is coming. She did not know exactly when. She did not know exactly how. But she knew with the deep, slow certainty of a woman who had been married to a Navy man for 25 years that when the time came, she would be ready. Vincent had made sure of it. The neighbor who found her was a woman named Eileen Pruitt, 73 years old, who lived across the street and had known Margaret since 1981. Eileen could not sleep that night because of the rain, and around 11:30 she got up to make herself a cup of tea, and standing at her own kitchen window, she noticed that the light was still on in Margaret's kitchen. This was strange. Margaret was a woman of habits, and Margaret turned her kitchen light off at 9 o'clock every night. Winter or summer, rain or shine, Eileen watched the light for 10 minutes. Then she put on her raincoat and her boots and walked across the street. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder. Then she did what neighbors who have known each other for 45 years sometimes do. She tried the door. It was unlocked. She stepped inside, calling Margaret's name softly, and then less softly. And then she walked into the kitchen and saw her oldest friend lying on the floor, with her cheek against the tile and her eyes half open, and her right hand still curled round the edge of the dish towel. Eileen Pruitt called 911 at 11:47. The ambulance arrived at 12:04. By the time they wheeled Margaret out into the rain, she had been unconscious for nearly an hour and a half. At the hospital, the doctors moved fast. Scans, tests, IV lines. A young neurologist with tired eyes came out into the waiting area sometime around 2 in the morning and used the word stroke. Moderate, he said. Right hemisphere. We won't know the full extent for several days. We've got the swelling under control. She's stable. She's lucky her neighbor found her when she did. The 3 Halloran children were called one by one in the small hours of the morning. Gerald arrived first in a wrinkled shirt and an expensive overcoat, his face arranged into the careful expression of a son who's very, very worried. Vivian arrived an hour later, makeup applied in the car, eyes red in a way that looked almost convincing. Nathaniel came last, and Nathaniel actually was shaken, actually was scared, though he would not have been able to say exactly why. They stood in the ICU waiting room. They hugged each other. They said the things people say. The nurses watched them and thought what a devoted family. The nurses were wrong. Around 4 in the morning, after the doctor had spoken to them a second time and explained that even in the best case scenario, their mother would need weeks of rehabilitation and possibly long-term care, the 3 of them walked together down the corridor toward the elevator. They did not go down. They stopped near a window at the end of the hall, where the rain was still coming down on the parking lot below. And Gerald turned to his sister and brother and said the sentence that would shape everything that came after. If she doesn't recover all the way, we're looking at serious medical bills. Vivian folded her arms across her chest. The house, she said, is the only real asset she has. Nathaniel looked at the floor. He thought about his mother's face. He thought about the check she had written him in August. He hesitated. Then he said very quietly, "We should probably start figuring out what to do with it." Gerald nodded slowly. "We don't want to be caught flat-footed." Vivian said, "Exactly." It took them 9 minutes by the clock on the wall at the end of the hallway to decide that they were going to empty their mother's house and put it on the market while she was still lying unconscious in the intensive care unit. 9 minutes. Less time than it takes to boil an egg. What they did not know, what they could not have known, was that a young woman in light blue scrubs was standing just around the corner of the corridor, holding a clipboard against her chest. Her back pressed against the wall, listening to every word. Her name was Claire Whitfield. She was 28 years old. She had worked the ICU at Yale New Haven for 3 years, and she had heard a lot of difficult family conversations in those 3 years. But she had never heard one quite like this. Cold, practical, already past the part where they were supposed to be afraid. She listened until the elevator doors finally closed on them. Then she walked back to the nurse's station, set down her clipboard, and pulled out her phone. She did not call her supervisor. She did not call hospital security. She scrolled down to a contact in her phone, listed simply as Grandpa, and she pressed the green button. The phone rang 4 times before a man's voice answered, raspy from sleep, but immediately alert in the way old sailors are immediately alert. "Claire." "It's 4 in the morning. Are you all right, Grandpa?" she said. "I'm fine. But I need to ask you something. Do you remember a name from a long time ago? A Navy man. Vincent Halloran." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. So long that Claire thought the call had dropped. Then, very slowly, the voice of Arthur Whitfield, 81 years old retired attorney, who had served 2 tours on the USS Forrestal with a quiet kid from Connecticut named Vincent Halloran. Between 1954 and 1958 said, "Why are you asking me that, sweetheart?" Because his wife is in my ICU, Claire said, and his children are in the hallway planning to sell her house while she's unconscious. There was another silence. And then Arthur Whitfield said in a voice that was suddenly 30 years younger, "Where are you?" "I'm coming down there right now." The first moving truck arrived at the house on Willow Street at 9:45 the following morning. It was a Friday. The rain had stopped. The sky was the pale washed-out blue of a Connecticut October. Gerald was already there, standing on the front lawn in jeans and a leather jacket, drinking a cup of gas station coffee, directing two men in matching gray uniforms toward the front door. Eileen Pruitt watched from her kitchen window across the street. She did not move. She did not blink. She simply watched as the men carried out one by one the things she had seen inside that house for 45 years. The blue armchair where Vincent used to read the paper. The grandfather clock that had belonged to Margaret's mother. The dining room table where she had eaten Thanksgiving dinner with the Halloran family in 1987 and 1992 and 1998. She picked up her phone. She thought about calling her own daughter. She thought about calling the police. Instead, after a long moment, she set the phone back down. Because what was she going to say? They were his children. It was their right, wasn't it? By the end of the first day, the dining room was empty. By the end of the second day, the upstairs bedrooms were empty. Vivian arrived on Saturday morning and went directly to her father's old desk in the corner of the master bedroom. The desk Vincent had used to do the books for his construction company. The desk where Margaret still wrote her Christmas cards every December. Vivian pulled open the top drawer. Inside, in a small velvet box, was Vincent's Navy Commendation Medal. The medal he had been awarded in 1960 for pulling two sailors out of an engine room fire aboard the USS Forrestal. The medal he had never once worn in public. Vivian held it in her hand for about 4 seconds. Then she dropped it into a plastic bag along with some old cufflinks and a tarnished tie clip. She would list it on eBay that night. She would sell it for $180 to a collector in Pennsylvania. She would not tell her brothers. She would not tell anyone. In the kitchen, Nathaniel was packing photographs into a cardboard box. He was the only one of the three who actually looked at any of them. He picked up a black and white photograph of his father, in dress whites taken in 1959, standing on the steel deck of a ship with the ocean behind him and a half smile on his face. Nathaniel stared at it for a long time. Then, without quite knowing why, he slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket instead of putting it in the box. It was the only thing he saved. While the trucks came and went, while his sister sold his father's medal, and his brother packed away 30 years of family photographs. An 81-year-old man named Arthur Whitfield sat in a small law office on Church Street in downtown Millbrook, in front of a fireproof safe that had not been opened in 11 years. He turned the dial slowly, right, left, right. The door swung open. Inside, near the back, behind some old client files, was a thick manila envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed with red wax that had cracked but not broken. Written across the front in Vincent Halloran's careful block handwriting were 6 words: "To be opened upon Margaret's betrayal." Arthur Whitfield lifted the envelope out with both hands. He set it on his desk. He sat down in his chair and looked at it for a very long time. Outside his window, a maple tree was dropping its red leaves onto the sidewalk. Inside, the only sound was the slow ticking of a brass clock on the wall. After a while, he reached for his telephone. He dialed a number from memory, a number he had not dialed since 1994. It rang in an empty house on Willow Street, where no one was left to answer it. Of course it did. He had known it would. He hung up. Then he spoke quietly to no one and to everyone the way men of his generation sometimes speak when they are alone in a room with the past. "Vincent," he said, "old shipmate, the promise you made me make you 35 years ago. It's time." He picked up the envelope. He locked the safe. He put on his coat. And Arthur Whitfield, the last man on earth who knew exactly what was hidden behind the pantry in the kitchen of the house on Willow Street, walked out of his office and into the bright, cold Connecticut afternoon, carrying in his hands a letter from a dead man that was about to change everything. 3 living people thought they knew about the woman they called their mother. 3 miles away in a hospital room on the 4th floor of Yale, New Haven, Margaret Halloran's right hand twitched once against the white sheet. The monitor by her bed registered a small change in her brain activity. The nurse on duty noted it on her chart and went back to her station. Margaret did not wake up that day. She did not wake up the next day either. But somewhere deep inside her, in a place the doctors could not see and the machines could not measure, she was already counting. Counting the days her children had been alone in her house. Counting the rooms they had emptied. Counting the chances they still had even now to do the right thing. She was a patient woman. She had always been a patient woman. Vincent used to say it was her best quality and her most dangerous one. The rain started again that night, soft this time against the dark windows of the ICU, and in the quiet between the beeps of the heart monitor. If you had been standing very close to her bed, you might have been able to hear Margaret Halloran breathing in the slow, steady rhythm of a woman who was not finished yet, not even close. The emptying of the house on Willow Street did not happen all at once. It happened the way a slow tide takes a beach, one wave at a time, each one carrying away a little more, until by the end of the week there was almost nothing left of the shoreline Margaret Halloran had spent 50 years building. By Monday morning, the living room was bare. The blue armchair where Vincent used to read the evening paper had been sold to an estate buyer in West Hartford for $220. The grandfather clock that had belonged to Margaret's mother, the clock that had chimed every hour of every Christmas morning the Halloran children had ever known, had been loaded into the back of a pickup truck and driven away by an antique dealer who paid $400 cash without asking a single question about where it came from. Gerald handled the cash. He kept a careful ledger in a small notebook, the way his father had once kept ledgers for the construction company. He told himself this was responsible. He told himself this was practical. He told himself a lot of things in those long October days, standing in the empty rooms of the house he had grown up in, listening to his own footsteps echo on the hardwood floors. What he did not tell himself was that he had already begun spending the money before the house was even sold. $40,000 of the buyer's deposit had gone within 48 hours into 3 credit cards he had been hiding from his wife for nearly 2 years. He told himself he would pay it back from his share of the final sale. He told himself nobody would ever know. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a great many things that week. Vivian came to the house every evening after work. She would pull into the driveway in her white BMW, walk through the front door without knocking, and go directly to whatever room she had decided to strip that night. She was in her way the most efficient of the 3. She had downloaded an app on her phone that could identify the resale value of almost any household object within seconds. She photographed silver. She photographed china. She photographed her mother's wedding ring, which Margaret had stopped wearing 12 years ago because her finger had grown too thin to keep it on safely, and which had been sitting in a small ceramic dish on the dresser ever since. Vivian sold the wedding ring on Tuesday night to a jeweler in Bridgeport. She got $1,100 for it. She told her brothers she had gotten $600. She kept the difference in a separate envelope in her purse. Nathaniel did less work than his siblings, and what work he did slowly. He sat on the floor of the upstairs hallway one afternoon, surrounded by boxes of photographs, and he found himself unable to throw anything away. He kept opening the boxes back up. He kept taking pictures out, looking at them, putting them back. There was one of him at 7 years old sitting on his father's shoulders at a parade. There was one of his mother at 35 leaning against the kitchen counter, laughing at something the camera could not see. There was one of all 3 children on the front porch of the house on a summer evening in 1989, all of them squinting into the sun, his mother's hand resting on Vivian's shoulder, his father's arm around Gerald. Nathaniel sat with that photograph for a long time. He did not put it in a box. He folded it in half very carefully and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket, next to the picture of his father in dress whites that he had taken 3 days earlier. He did not know, sitting there on the hallway floor, with his father's young face pressed against his ribs, that he was the only one of the 3 Halloran children who would survive what was coming with anything at all. On Wednesday afternoon, Eileen Pruitt finally crossed the street. She had watched the trucks come and go for 6 days. She had watched Vivian's BMW pull in and pull out. She had watched Gerald stand on the front lawn talking on his phone in a voice that was too cheerful for a man whose mother was in a coma. And finally on Wednesday, she could not bear it any longer. She knocked on the front door. Gerald opened it. He smiled the smile he used at closings. "Mrs. Pruitt," he said, "how nice to see you." Eileen did not return the smile. She looked past him into the house. The walls were bare. The hooks where her old friend's framed needlework had hung for 30 years were empty. The hallway echoed. "How is your mother, Gerald?" "She's stable." "They're hopeful." Eileen nodded slowly. "And what she said is all this." Gerald's smile thinned. "We're just preparing," he said, "in case she can't come home. The medical bills, you understand." Eileen looked at him for a long time. She had known Gerald since he was 8 years old. She had watched him at Little League games. She had watched him graduate from high school. She had brought a casserole to this very house the day his father died. And Gerald, 20 years old at the time, home from college for the funeral, had hugged her in the kitchen and cried into her shoulder. She did not recognize the man standing in front of her now. "I see," she said quietly. And she turned and walked back across the street, and she did not say another word. That night, she sat in her own kitchen with her own cup of tea. She picked up her phone 3 times. She set it down 3 times. She did not know who to call. She did not know what to say. Some part of her, the old part, the part that had been raised to mind her own business and trust, that families would handle their own affairs, kept telling her to leave it alone. But another part of her, the part that had found Margaret on the kitchen floor in the rain, knew that something was very wrong on Willow Street. And that part of her did not sleep well that night, or the next night, or the night after that. 11 days. That was how long Margaret Halloran lay unconscious in the ICU at Yale New Haven. The doctor said it was a good sign that her vitals stayed strong. The doctor said the brain sometimes needs to rest before it comes back. The doctors used careful words like cautiously optimistic and "we'll see." The nurses who had been doing this work longer than most of the doctors had been alive did not say anything. The nurses just watched. Claire Whitfield watched the most carefully of all. She had not told her grandfather everything yet. She had told him about the children in the hallway. She had told him about the moving truck she had seen in the photographs Eileen Pruitt had quietly taken from her kitchen window and forwarded through a chain of 2 other neighbors to the hospital, where they eventually reached Claire. But she had not yet told him about the small things she had noticed on the 7th day. When she was changing Margaret's IV line, and the old woman's eyelid had fluttered just once, and Claire had leaned down close to her face and whispered, "Mrs. Halloran, can you hear me?" And the old woman's mouth had moved just barely around a single word. "Vincent." Claire had stood up very slowly. She had not written it on the chart. She had not told the doctor. She had walked back to the nurse's station, sat down and stared at the wall for a long time, and then she had picked up a phone and texted her grandfather a single line. "She's still in there. She's just waiting." On the morning of the 12th day, Margaret Halloran opened her eyes. The room was quiet. The light through the blinds was pale and gray. A nurse she did not recognize was checking the monitor by her bed. Margaret blinked once. She blinked twice. She moved her right hand slowly against the sheet. Her fingers worked. Her toes worked. Her mind, when she tested it, was slower than it had been, but it was hers. She turned her head, and she looked at the young woman with the dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Where am I?" Margaret said. Her voice was a whisper, but it was steady. Claire Whitfield set down the chart she was holding. She walked to the side of the bed. She took Margaret's hand gently, the way she had been taught to do with patients waking up from long unconsciousness. "You're at Yale, New Haven, Mrs. Halloran. You had a stroke. You've been here for 11 days. You're going to be all right." Margaret looked at her. Her eyes were clear. Claire had been a nurse long enough to know the difference between a patient who was confused and a patient who was simply taking the measure of a situation. Margaret Halloran was taking the measure. "My children," Margaret said. Claire hesitated. She had practiced this moment a dozen times in her head over the last 11 days. She had not known how she would say it. Now, looking down at the woman in the bed, she found she did not need to practice anymore. "Mrs. Halloran," she said, "there are some things you should know. About your house. About what they've been doing." Margaret listened. She did not interrupt. She did not cry. She did not even change her expression. She let Claire tell her in a low voice everything Claire had seen and heard and pieced together over the last week and a half. The hallway conversation, the moving trucks, the for sale sign that had gone up in the front yard the day before yesterday, the photographs Eileen Pruitt had taken. Everything. When Claire was finished, Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she did something Claire had not been expecting at all. She smiled. It was a small smile, and it was tired. But it was a real smile, and it reached all the way to her eyes. And then she asked a question that did not make any sense to Claire at the time, though it would make sense soon enough. "Have they touched the pantry?" Claire blinked. "I'm sorry, the what?" "The pantry," Margaret said. "In the kitchen. Has anyone moved the shelves? Has anyone opened the back wall?" Claire shook her head slowly. "I don't think so, Mrs. Halloran. From the photographs I've seen, the pantry looks the same as it always did. Empty, but the same." Margaret closed her eyes. Her smile did not leave her face. When she spoke again, it was very quietly, almost to herself. "Then Vincent still wins." Claire did not understand, but she did not ask. She simply held Margaret's hand for another long moment. And then she said very gently, "My grandfather is a man named Arthur Whitfield. He served on the USS Forrestal with your husband. He has been waiting to speak with you. He has something he wants to give you. May I ask him to come?" Margaret opened her eyes. She looked at the young woman who had been standing watch over her for 11 days. She squeezed her hand once with surprising strength. "Tell Arthur," she said. "Tell him I have been waiting for him too. Tell him to bring everything." The doctors were unhappy with what Margaret did next. She told them on the morning of her 13th day in the hospital that she was going home. They explained that she needed at least another week of monitoring. They explained that she would need physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, a long, careful plan of recovery. They used words like advisable and recommended and strongly suggested. Margaret Halloran listened politely, and then she said in the steady, quiet voice of a 76-year-old woman who had been married for 25 years to a man who knew exactly when to hold his ground, "I am going home today. I will sign whatever papers you put in front of me. I will not hold the hospital responsible. But I am going home, and I am going home this afternoon. And the only person I want to drive me is my son Gerald." The doctor opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the nurse beside him. The nurse, who was Claire Whitfield, did not look back at him. She was watching Margaret's face. There was something in that face that the doctor did not have the experience to recognize, but Claire did. She had been raised by Arthur Whitfield. She knew the look of a person who has already decided how a story is going to end and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. The doctor signed the papers. Margaret signed the papers. And Claire, before she went off shift, slipped quietly into a small consultation room down the hall and made 2 phone calls. The first was to her grandfather. The second was to a number Arthur had given her 3 days earlier, a number she had been told to call only when the time came. The time, she said into the second phone. "It's today." Gerald Halloran arrived at the hospital at 2 in the afternoon. He was annoyed. He had been in the middle of a conference call when his mother's nurse had called him to say that Margaret was being discharged and was asking for him specifically. He had told the nurse he would send a car service. The nurse had told him very politely that Mrs. Halloran had been very clear about who she wanted to drive her, so Gerald drove. He pulled up to the front entrance of Yale New Haven in his black Audi. He got out. He waited. When the orderly wheeled his mother out into the bright cold afternoon, Gerald arranged his face into the careful expression he had been practicing in the rearview mirror. Concern, relief, the face of a son. "Mom," he said. "Thank God." Margaret looked up at him from the wheelchair. Her face gave nothing away. She let him help her into the passenger seat. She let him fasten her seatbelt. She let him close the door. She watched him walk around the front of the car to the driver's side, and she noted with the small, precise part of her mind that had been her best quality her entire life that he could not quite meet her eyes. "Take me home, Gerald," she said quietly. He started the engine. He pulled out of the parking lot. They drove in silence for the first few minutes. Then, somewhere on the highway between New Haven and Millbrook, Gerald cleared his throat and began. "Mom," he said, "I need to talk to you about some things. While you were in the hospital, we had to make some decisions. Difficult decisions. The doctors weren't sure you were coming back. And the medical bills. You understand. We did what we thought was best." Margaret did not look at him. She looked out the window at the red and gold trees flashing past on the side of the highway. Connecticut in October. The same trees she had been driving past for 50 years. "We started organizing things at the house," Gerald said. "The furniture. Some of your father's old belongings. We didn't think you would want to be burdened with all of that when you came home. And the house itself. We talked to a realtor. We thought it might be best to consider selling." He paused. He glanced at her. She still had not turned her head. "There's a buyer, Mom. A serious one. $385,000. Cash. We could close in 2 weeks. We could put you somewhere safer, somewhere easier to manage. We could make sure you're comfortable for the rest of your..." He did not finish the sentence. He could not. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then, still looking out the window, she said, "Did you check the pantry, Gerald?" Gerald frowned. "The pantry," he said. "Yes," Margaret said. "In the kitchen, the back corner. Did anyone check?" Gerald shook his head, half laughing in a confused way. "Mom, it's just shelves. We cleared out the food. There's nothing in there." Margaret nodded once very slowly. She did not say anything else for the rest of the drive. They pulled onto Willow Street at 3:20 in the afternoon. The "for sale" sign was the first thing Margaret saw. It stood at the edge of the front lawn, white and red, with the realtor's smiling face printed on it. Gerald slowed the car. He glanced at his mother. She was looking straight ahead. He parked in the driveway. He came around to the passenger side. He helped her out. He handed her the cane the hospital had given her. She took it, leaned on it, and stood for a moment on the cracked concrete of the driveway she had walked across 50 years of mornings. The house looked the same from the outside. The same brick, the same fading shutters, the same narrow porch. Inside, she knew it would not be the same at all. Gerald opened the front door for her. Margaret stepped through it. The hallway was empty. The walls were bare. The hooks where her framed photographs had hung were empty. The runner that had covered the hardwood floor was gone. Her own footsteps and the soft tap of her cane were the only sounds in the house. From somewhere deeper inside, she could hear voices. Vivian's voice, Nathaniel's voice, and a third voice, a man's, professional and bright, the voice of someone who sold houses for a living. Margaret walked slowly down the hallway toward the kitchen. Gerald followed her. He was trying to say something. She did not listen. She turned the corner into the kitchen. Vivian was standing by the back door in a cream-colored coat, holding a clipboard. Nathaniel was sitting at the small table by the window, the only piece of furniture left in the room, with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes on the floor. The realtor. A tall man in a gray suit was standing by the sink mid-sentence. They all stopped when they saw her. Vivian recovered first. She came forward with a tight, bright smile, arms half raised, as if for a hug. "Mom," she said, "we didn't expect you so soon. You should be resting. You look so tired." Margaret looked at her daughter. She looked at her younger son. She looked at the realtor. She did not say a word. She walked slowly across the kitchen floor, where she had washed dishes for 50 years, toward the pantry door at the back of the room. Vivian's smile faltered. "Mom," she said, "there's nothing in there. We cleared it out. There's nothing." Margaret stopped in front of the pantry. She rested her hand on the doorknob. She turned slowly and she looked at her 3 children. Gerald in the doorway, Vivian by the table, Nathaniel still sitting, finally looking up. "Your father," she said. That was all. Just those 2 words. Her voice was very quiet, very steady. "Your father." She opened the pantry door. The shelves were empty, just as Vivian had said. 2 narrow walls of bare wooden shelves lit by the soft afternoon light coming through the small window above. Margaret leaned forward into the pantry, and she reached past the 3rd shelf on the right into the back corner, and she pressed her fingertips against a small section of wood that looked exactly like all the other sections of wood around it. There was a soft click, a click so small it should not have meant anything, a click that no one else in that kitchen had ever heard in their entire lives. Vivian's smile vanished completely. Gerald took a step forward. "Mom," he said. "What are you?" The back wall of the pantry shifted inward very slightly, with the soft whisper of wood against wood. A thin vertical line appeared where there had been no line before. Margaret pushed gently with the flat of her palm. The wall swung open on hidden hinges. Dust drifted out into the kitchen light, and beyond the opening in the small dark space behind the pantry, 3 things became visible. A row of gray metal filing cabinets, 4 of them set against the back wall. A heavy steel safe set into the concrete of the foundation. The kind of safe a man builds into a house when he does not ever intend for it to be moved. And on top of the safe alone, a small wooden box the size of a Bible with the name Vincent Halloran burned into the lid, and the anchor and chain of the United States Navy carved beneath it. The kitchen was completely silent. The realtor's mouth was open. Vivian had gone the color of paper. Gerald was not moving. Nathaniel had risen slowly from the table without realizing it, one hand pressed flat against his chest, over the place where his father's photograph was folded in his jacket pocket. Margaret turned, leaning on her cane, and she faced her children. "Your father built this room in 1989, she said. She was not raising her voice. She did not need to. The silence in that kitchen was so deep that the smallest sound carried like a bell. He built it with his own hands, over the course of 3 months. While you, Gerald, were finishing middle school, while you, Vivian, were in the 6th grade, while you, Nathaniel, were just learning to ride a bicycle. He built it because the doctors had just told him he was sick, and he wanted to make sure that whatever happened to him, and whatever happened to me, I would never be left at the mercy of anyone. Not even she said." And her eyes moved slowly from Gerald to Vivian, to Nathaniel of you. The realtor very quietly picked up his briefcase from the counter. He cleared his throat. He said something about coming back at a better time. No one looked at him. He walked out the front door. Nobody heard the door close. Margaret turned back to the pantry. She placed her hand very gently on the lid of the wooden box with her husband's name on it. She did not open it. Not yet. She looked over her shoulder at her 3 grown children. Now she said, "You are going to sit down and you are going to listen, because there is a great deal that you do not know about your father, and there is a great deal that you do not know about me. And there is a great deal," she said, "that you do not know about what you have just spent the last 2 weeks trying to sell." The afternoon light moved slowly across the empty kitchen floor. Somewhere outside, a car engine started and faded down Willow Street. Inside the small hidden room, the dust was still settling on the metal cabinets and the steel safe and the wooden box that had been waiting exactly as Vincent Halloran had left it for 32 years. And Margaret Halloran, 76 years old, leaning on a cane in the kitchen of the house her husband had built around her, like a fortress, finally allowed herself for the first time since she had opened her eyes in the hospital to feel the smallest beginning of something that was not quite anger, and not quite grief, and not quite triumph. It was more than anything the quiet feeling of a long promise being kept. Margaret did not sit down. She did not need to. The cane was enough. She stood in front of the open pantry with the small hidden room behind her, like a second heart inside the house, and she watched her 3 children arrange themselves slowly around the kitchen. The way children arrange themselves when they are about to be told something they have spent their whole lives not wanting to hear. Gerald leaned against the doorframe with his arms folded across his chest. His face had become very still. He was a man who had spent 30 years negotiating real estate deals, and he was trying even now to do the arithmetic of what he was looking at. Filing cabinets, a foundation safe, a wooden box with his father's name on it. He was trying to calculate what it meant. He was failing. Vivian sat down at the small table by the window very slowly, as if her legs had decided the matter for her. Her cream-colored coat fell open. Her hands were folded in her lap, and the knuckles were white. She was not looking at her mother. She was looking at a small spot on the linoleum floor about 2 feet in front of her shoes. Nathaniel had not moved. He was standing with one hand still pressed against his chest against the photograph of his father, in dress whites that he had been carrying with him for 9 days. He was the only one of the 3 who was looking directly at Margaret. His eyes were very wide. They were the eyes of a 44-year-old man who was suddenly, for the first time in a very long time, seeing his mother. Margaret reached into the hidden room. She lifted out the first filing cabinet drawer she could reach. She slid it onto the kitchen counter. The drawer was heavy. Her hand trembled. She did not allow herself to acknowledge the tremor. She opened the folder on top. Inside were deeds, property deeds. Old ones yellowed at the edges dated 1985 and 1986 and 1987 and 1988. Each one signed in Vincent Halloran's careful block handwriting. Each one for a small parcel of land in the towns east of Hartford. Towns that had been farmland and forest when Vincent had bought them. Towns that now in 2026 were something else entirely. Margaret spread them across the counter, one after another, like a woman dealing a long, slow hand of cards. "Your father bought his first piece of land in May of 1985, she said. 3 acres outside Vernon. $1,800 he paid cash. He never told any of you. He never told most of his friends. He told me because he told me everything, but he asked me not to speak of it." She lifted out another folder. "He bought his second piece in October of the same year. 5 acres near Manchester. He bought his third in the spring of 1986. He bought his fourth that summer. By the time he was diagnosed in 1989, he had purchased 14 separate parcels of land in 7 different towns. He bought them with money he made in the construction business. Money he saved by driving a truck for 15 years instead of buying a new one. Money he saved by wearing the same brown coat every winter from 1972 until the year he died." Gerald shifted against the doorframe. His arms were still folded. His voice when it came was the careful voice of a man who knew exactly what 14 parcels of land east of Hartford might be worth in the year 2026, and who was trying very hard not to let that knowledge show on his face. "How much?" he said. "Mom, how much is it?" Margaret did not look at him. She lifted out a final folder. She set it on top of the others. In 2021, she said an Amazon distribution facility was built on the land that includes 9 of those parcels. In 2023, a regional logistics center was constructed on the property that contains 4 others. The 14th parcel sits along a road that the state widened into a 4-lane highway in 2019. As of the last appraisal conducted 3 months before my stroke, The combined value of the land your father purchased with money he saved by wearing the same coat every winter is $5,200,000. The number landed in the kitchen like a stone dropped into a deep well. For a long moment, nobody made a sound. Vivian's eyes had finally come up off the linoleum. They had gone somewhere very far away. Gerald had uncrossed his arms. One of his hands was resting flat against the doorframe, as if he needed it there to stay upright. Nathaniel had begun very quietly to cry. He was not making any noise. The tears were simply running down his face, and he was not wiping them away. Margaret turned. She walked slowly with her cane back to the pantry. She reached up onto the steel safe. She lifted down the small wooden box with Vincent's name on it. She carried it to the table where Vivian was sitting. Vivian, without being asked, slid her chair back to make room. Margaret set the box down. She rested both her hands on the lid. She closed her eyes for a moment the way a woman closes her eyes before a prayer she has been saving for a long time. Then she opened the box. Inside, on a folded square of dark blue velvet, lay a single envelope. The paper was thick and yellowed. Across the front, in Vincent's handwriting, were 5 words. For Maggie. When the time comes. Margaret lifted the envelope out. She broke the wax seal with her thumbnail. She unfolded the letter inside. It was 3 pages long, handwritten on both sides. The ink slightly faded, but still perfectly legible. The handwriting of a man who had been a Navy machinist's mate and a small-town contractor and a quiet husband. The handwriting of a man who had known in the spring of 1989 that he was running out of time. Margaret began to read aloud. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Maggie, my dear wife, if you are reading this letter, it means the day I hoped would never come has come. It means our children have done the thing I was most afraid they would do. I am writing this to you in May of 1989, 6 weeks after the doctors told me what was growing inside me, and 3 days after I finished building the room behind the pantry. Arthur is coming by tomorrow to take this letter into his safekeeping. He has promised me he will not give it to you until you ask him for it. He has promised me he will know the moment. I'm sorry, Maggie. I am sorry that I am writing this letter at all. I have spent the last 3 months praying I would be wrong about them. About Gerald, about Vivian, about Nathaniel. I have watched them grow up. I have loved them more than I have ever been able to say. But I have also watched them, Maggie. I have watched the way Gerald looks at things he wants. I have watched the way Vivian counts what other people have. I have watched Nathaniel float year after year, never finding his feet. And I am afraid, Maggie. I am afraid that when I am gone, and when you are old, and when there is nothing left to stop them, they will not be able to stop themselves. I hope I'm wrong. I pray every night that I'm wrong. If I am wrong, then this letter will sit in Arthur's safe forever, and you will never read it, and I will be glad. But I have not been a man who plans for the best. I have been a man who plans for the worst. The Navy taught me that. The ocean taught me that. 8 years of standing watch in the middle of the night taught me that, so I have prepared Maggie. Everything you need is in the room behind the pantry. Arthur will explain the trust. The land is yours completely until the day you decide what to do with it. No one can take it from you. No one can sign for you. No one can move you out of our house. I have made sure of that with every piece of paper in those cabinets. I want you to do what you think is right, not what is kind, not what is easy, what is right. If our children have proven themselves worthy, share with them. If they have not, then do what your father would have done. Do what my father would have done. Stand on the ground I bought for you and do not move. I have loved you, Maggie, since the night I met you at the church social in October of 1968, 6 years after I came home from the Navy. I have loved you every day since. I am loving you right now, writing this. And I will be loving you on the day you read it wherever I am. I am sorry I could not stay longer. I am sorry I could not protect you in person. I have done the best I could from where I will be. Yours always, Vincent. Margaret stopped reading. The kitchen was very quiet. Vivian was holding her own face in her hands. She was not making any sound, but her shoulders were shaking. Gerald had turned away from the doorway. He was facing the wall. His back was very straight. He had not moved for some time. Nathaniel had sat down on the floor. He had simply lowered himself with no particular ceremony until he was sitting cross-legged on the linoleum like a child. And he was looking up at his mother with an expression on his face that she had not seen there since he was 7 years old. Margaret folded the letter very carefully along the lines Vincent had folded it 37 years earlier. She slid it back into the envelope. She placed the envelope back on the dark blue velvet inside the wooden box. She closed the lid. She turned to her children. She did not raise her voice. "Your father," she said, "knew you better than you knew yourselves. I gave him my word that if this day ever came, I would not flinch from it. I have not flinched. I'm not going to flinch now." She paused. She rested her hand on top of the box. "In 3 days," she said, "we will meet at the office of Mr. Arthur Whitfield in town. He will explain to you what your father put in place in 1991. He will explain to you what each of you has done and what each of you has not done, and what the law in the state of Connecticut has to say about both. You will come, all 3 of you, and you will listen, and then I will tell you what I have decided. Until then," she said, "I would like you to leave my house." Nobody argued. Nobody asked a question. Vivian stood up from the table without lifting her face from her hands and walked slowly past her mother and down the empty hallway and out the front door. Gerald followed her without a word. Nathaniel got up off the floor. He stopped in front of his mother. He did not try to hug her. He did not try to apologize. He simply looked at her with his father's eyes, and he nodded once slowly, and then he walked out of the kitchen and out of the house. Margaret stood alone in her empty kitchen, leaning on her cane with the wooden box on the table beside her, and the hidden room behind her, and her husband's voice still in her ears. She closed her eyes. She breathed out very slowly. "I read it, Vincent," she said to no one and to everyone. "I read every word." 3 days later, the 4 of them sat in the small wood-paneled conference room of Arthur Whitfield's law office on Church Street. Margaret sat at one end of the long table with the wooden box in front of her. Arthur sat across from her in a brown suit that did not fit quite the way it had fit 10 years ago, with a thick folder open in front of him. Gerald, Vivian, and Nathaniel sat in a row along one side like defendants. Arthur Whitfield, 81 years old, retired, but not retired, who had served on the USS Forrestal with Vincent Halloran in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean between 1954 and 1958, cleared his throat. "What I'm about to tell you," he said, "your father arranged in this office in the autumn of 1991, 2.5 years before he died. I drafted the documents. I witnessed his signature. I have kept them in my safe for the last 35 years. He looked at each of the 3 children in turn. "Your father," he said, "placed every asset he owned, including the house on Willow Street and all 14 parcels of land, into an irrevocable trust. Your mother is the sole trustee. The trust cannot be broken. It cannot be challenged. It cannot be set aside by a court except in cases of demonstrated incapacity. And your mother, as her physicians have confirmed in writing as of yesterday afternoon, is fully and legally competent." He turned a page. "The contract that you, Mr. Gerald Halloran, signed with a buyer 12 days ago for the sale of the house at the end of Willow Street is therefore void. It has no legal force. The buyer will be refunded his earnest money in full. The $40,000 that you have already withdrawn from that earnest money will need to be returned within 30 days, or you will be in breach of contract with a third party who is, I am told, already preparing to file suit." Gerald did not say anything. He was looking at his hands. "That," Arthur said, "is the easier part of what I have to say today." He turned another page. "A nurse at Yale New Haven Medical Center has provided a sworn statement, supported by a partial audio recording, of a conversation held in a 4th-floor hallway between the 3 of you on the night of October 2nd of this year. In that conversation, you discussed in detail the liquidation of your mother's property and the sale of her home while she was unconscious in the intensive care unit 1 floor above you. In addition, we have receipts, eBay records, estate sale, invoices, and bank statements documenting more than $60,000 in transactions made between October 3rd and October 14th, involving your mother's property conducted entirely without her consent, while she was medically incapable of providing it. He looked up. Under Connecticut General Statute Section 53A-321, this constitutes elder financial abuse. Under Section 53A-122, the dollar amount involved would qualify the charges as a Class B felony. The maximum sentence is 20 years. The minimum for a first offense at this level is 5. Vivian made a small sound. She pressed her hand against her mouth. Arthur Whitfield closed the folder. That, he said, is what your mother could do today if she chose to. He looked at Margaret. Everyone in the room looked at Margaret. Margaret rested her hand on the wooden box. She breathed in slowly. She breathed out. "I am not going to do that," she said. The relief that passed across the three faces opposite her was visible and immediate. Vivian let out a breath she had been holding for days. Gerald closed his eyes. "I am not going to do that," Margaret said again. "Because your father would not have wanted me to do that. Your father did not build that room so that I could send our children to prison. Your father built that room so that I could be free." She opened the wooden box. She did not take the letter out this time. She simply rested her fingers on the velvet beside it. "But I am going to do what your father told me to do. I am going to do what is right." She looked at Arthur. Arthur slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward her. Margaret took it. She did not need to read it. She had written it herself with Arthur the day before. 70% of the trust, she said, will be transferred to the United States Veterans Foundation to be administered as the Vincent Halloran Memorial Fund for American veterans. The money will go to veterans of the United States Navy and the United States Marine Corps who served between 1950 and 1975 and who are now living below the federal poverty line. There are 9,400 of them in this country. Your father was very nearly one of them before he started buying land. 20%, she said, will establish a scholarship fund at the University of Connecticut for the children and grandchildren of American veterans. The scholarship will be awarded each year by a committee that I will chair for as long as I am able and that Arthur will chair after me. The remaining 10%, she said, will be divided equally among the three of you. She paused. She looked at each of them in turn. "But there is a condition. Each of you, in order to receive your portion, will be required to visit your father's grave at the Connecticut State Veterans Cemetery in Middletown once per month for 24 consecutive months, beginning on the first day of the month following the execution of this document. Each visit will be witnessed and documented by the cemetery staff who have agreed to keep a logbook for this purpose. If any of you misses a single visit for any reason short of a documented medical emergency, your share will be forfeited and added to the Veterans Fund." She set the paper down. "You will go and you will sit with him," she said. "You will sit with the man who built this room. You will sit with the man whose medal your sister sold on the internet for $180. You will sit with the man whose photograph your brother is carrying in his jacket pocket right now and has been carrying for 9 days. You will sit with your father. You will think about what he did for you and what he asked of you and what you did not do for him while he was alive and what you tried to do to your mother while she could not stop you. You will do this every month for 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, if you have done it, you will receive your share. And if you have done it, perhaps you will deserve it." The room was silent. Nathaniel was the first to speak. He did not lift his head. His voice was low and rough. "I should have been going," he said. "I should have been going every month for the last 20 years. I mean, Mom. I'll be there. I'll be there on the 1st. Vivian was crying again quietly. She nodded. She could not make her voice work, but she nodded. Gerald was very still. For a long moment he did not move at all. Then he stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at his mother. He looked at Arthur. He looked at the folder on the table. He did not look at his brother or his sister. "I won't," he said. His voice was perfectly calm. "I won't go. I won't sit there. I won't take the money under those terms. I'm not going to be told by my own mother that I have to prove myself to a dead man." He turned. He walked out of the conference room. He did not close the door behind him. They heard his footsteps on the wooden floor of the hallway, and then the bell above the front door of the law office, and then nothing. Margaret watched the empty doorway for a long time. She did not cry. She had done her crying already a long time ago on a cold February night in 1994 in a back bedroom that did not exist anymore. She closed the wooden box. "So be it," she said quietly. "Vincent told me. He told me in the letter. He said, 'Do what is right, not what is kind.' I am doing what is right." She looked at her two remaining children. "I will see you both at the cemetery on the 1st. 8 months passed. It was June of 2027. The summer had come in soft and green over Connecticut. The maples on Willow Street were full of leaves. The garden along the side fence had been replanted by Nathaniel one weekend in April with tomatoes and beans and a small row of marigolds the way his mother had always planted it. Nathaniel had moved back to Millbrook. He had taken a job managing the office of a small contracting firm, not unlike the one his father had run. He came to the house 3 times a week. He fixed the gutters. He repainted the shutters. He sat with his mother on the back porch in the evenings, and they talked about small things and sometimes about large ones. Vivian had completed her first 7 monthly visits to the cemetery. She drove down from Stamford on the last Saturday of every month. She sat by the grave for 1 hour. She did not tell her mother what she did during that hour, and her mother did not ask. The cemetery staff confirmed each visit in the logbook. That was enough. Gerald had not been heard from. His marriage had ended in March. His house in Hartford had been foreclosed in May. He had moved, the family was told by a cousin in Pennsylvania, to somewhere in Florida. He did not return his mother's one phone call. He did not, the family understood, intend to return any others. On a warm Saturday in late June, in a wide green field at the back of the Connecticut State Veterans Cemetery in Middletown, the dedication ceremony for the Vincent Halloran Memorial Fund for American Veterans was held. A small stage had been built. The flag of the United States flapped softly in a light wind. Veterans in their old uniforms, some Navy, some Marines, some Army, sat in folding chairs in 3 neat rows. Their wives sat beside them. Their children and grandchildren stood behind them. Margaret Halloran, 77 years old, now walked to the podium with her cane in one hand and the small wooden box with Vincent's name on it in the other. Arthur Wheatfield walked beside her slowly. Nathaniel walked behind in a dark suit, his hands clasped in front of him. Margaret set the box on the podium. She opened it. She took out the velvet square. Beneath the square, in a small recess she had built into the box herself the previous winter, lay the Navy Commendation Medal that her husband had been awarded in 1960 aboard the USS Forrestal. The medal that her daughter had sold on eBay for $180 in October. The medal that Margaret had bought back through Arthur from a collector in Pennsylvania for $1,900. In November, she lifted the medal out of the box. She held it up so the old men in the folding chairs could see it. The sun caught the ribbon and the metal. "This belonged to my husband," she said. "He never wore it. He never spoke of it. He earned it on a ship in the Atlantic Ocean a long time before any of you sitting here today met him. He did not believe in talking about what he had done. He believed in doing the next thing. Today," she said, "the next thing is for him." After the ceremony, after the speeches and the handshakes and the photographs, Margaret asked Nathaniel to drive her up the small hill at the back of the cemetery. There, in a quiet row beneath a tall oak tree, was Vincent's grave. White marble, United States Navy. Born November 14, 1934. Died February 8, 1994. Beloved husband and father. Nathaniel stayed in the car. He understood. Margaret walked the last 20 feet by herself. She knelt down slowly with the help of her cane. She took the Navy Commendation Medal out of her coat pocket. She placed it gently on top of the marble beside the small flag that the cemetery had planted there for the summer. She rested her hand on the stone. The stone was warm from the sun. "I kept my word, Vincent," she said quietly. "I kept every word." She stayed there for a long time with her hand on the warm stone in the green Connecticut afternoon. The flag at the front of the cemetery turned slowly in the wind. Far away on a road she could not see a car passed and faded. And Margaret Halloran, 77 years old, widow of a United States Navy man, mother of 3 grown children, owner of a small brick house at the end of a quiet street, sat with her husband in the sunlight for as long as she wanted to. She had all the time in the world.